Thanks.
Looks like there's some people still filing in. So.
Okay, you can hear me okay? All right, great. I just wanted to say something that I couldn't find a place to park my car today.
You're going to have to deal with that the whole time.
I'm from the Boston area, so I have a weird accent. So later on, we're going to do a little role play, and I'm going to wear a Boston Red Sox hat. So.
Boo.
But anyway, I just want to go through these slides and talk a little bit about relapse prevention from something I borrowed from the SAA program, Sex Addicts Anonymous program, and it's called the three-circle diagram. And in this, they have three circles, and the middle circle has to do with relapse. And then the circle that's just outside of that is what I call living at risk. I'm going to use these to kind of orient ourselves to the different things you need to do to try to keep from relapsing. And the outer circle is, of course, where you want to be, and that's healthy living. And so what I thought I'd do is just kind of present this by the goals that we try to do in relapse prevention for each one of these circles. And the first one is, if a person has a relapse, then what we really want to do is have them be able to minimize the damage and get back to recovery as fast as possible. Sometimes when guys have slips, and I'm going to apologize up front, this is not a men-exclusive illness. Women suffer from this too, but just to make it easier for me to talk about it, I hope it's okay for me to just say the guy or he or whatever. Just makes it easier for me. So we want to get the person to recovery, get back to recovery as fast as possible and not have the relapse be something that lasts for weeks.
And Tom, can I chime in there real quick?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah.
The assumption here obviously is that this is presented as relapse prevention. Some of you may have this notion that, well, you get into recovery, you're not going to have any slips, you're not going to have any relapses, but that's just not reality. It happens. And so if you build upon these principles of relapse prevention and hopefully kind of continue to look upstream, right. And then ultimately the objective is to cease that behavior altogether.
Yeah, and we're going to, in the role play, we'll see that later too. So the second level of recovery focus anyway is what are you going to do when you're living in risk? And this happens a lot for people, and the goal here is for the person to become an expert on their version of the addiction. It doesn't show up the same from all people. As an example, for one person, going to a hotel on a business trip, it could be great, a chance to have a nice meal, get to work out, read a book, have some fun, doing relaxing, that kind of thing. For another person, going to a hotel on a business trip could be sheer danger. There's pornography available, there's nobody watching what I'm doing, you could go out and see an escort or something. So you have to become an expert on your version of the addiction so that you can figure out how to cope with that. And then the extra piece here is, well, you can plan as best as you can plan, but what do you do if there's something that shows up that you didn't plan? How are you going to handle that? And the last area, which I call healthy living, is building resilience and overall strength so that you're not so vulnerable, not so susceptible to the cues and triggers and things that could have come along. We're going to look at each one of these in turn. The first one we're going to look at is the skills to have to do with healthy living. And in this question here, it probably comes up for a lot of people. Acting out with the addiction creates a lot of havoc, right? Could have legal consequences. You could feel tremendous shame, devastation in marriages. If that's all of that is happening, why would a person continue doing it? And that's what this slide is looking at. The reason why is because the nervous system, this is like a nervous system affliction, and the behaviors and the sensations and the thoughts and everything that the person is experiencing is burned into their nervous system. In this thing here it says it creates a repeated firing of those neurons in a particular way, builds sort of like a superhighway. There's a doctor, psychiatrist named Dan Siegel, and Dan is a researcher at UCLA, and he's written a bunch of books about how the brain works, and the optimistic part of it is he says the brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity calls it, meaning the brain can heal itself. But in order to heal itself, there's 4 criteria. See if I can remember what they are. There's 4 conditions that have to exist for the person's brain to rewire. And they are repetition. So think of these words: repetition, emotional arousal, focused attention and novelty. Now, we're gonna turn that around into something positive, but think of why pornography, as an example, would have a tendency to create these fast neural pathways. Does it have these things? Is there repetition going on? Yeah, all the time. Is there arousal, emotional arousal? Yeah. Is the person focusing their attention? Mm-hmm, big time. And is there novelty? Yes. How many times can the guy hit that clicker in the course of an evening? Many, many times. So this fosters that kind of building of connections between the neurons that make it into a superhighway. And another thing he said, I'm not a doctor, but this is him. He is a doctor. So he said that something called myelin, which is a fatty sheath that goes along the length of the neuron when the thing has been exposed to repeated firing. And what that does is it increases the conductivity along that neuron 100 times any of the other pathways around that. So if you think about that, when you're trying to understand why somebody might do something that they don't want to because a certain cue shows up in the environment, like some picture or a pop-up on the computer, you can see what you've got as sort of a superhighway that's been developed. And if you want to think of it another way, it's conditioning and like muscle memory. Muscle memory is built in.
Tom, can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah.
It's a really important point what Tom's saying. It's a piece of awareness that the guys that I've worked with will, they're pretty far on in their recovery and they're still relapsing, they're still slipping. And sometimes they'll look and say, "Why? I totally don't understand why I would continue to do this. I'm ruining my marriage, continuing to kind of send those messages of betrayal to my wife, and embarrassing myself in front of my kids, spending tons of money on it." And they just don't understand that they really have been conditioned to have this happen. And so there's a big piece of awareness there. Flip side, wives, the same thing. Why did my husband continue to do this? I mean, it's out there. You know what I mean? He knows how much I'm hurting. Kids know what's going on. Other people see it. Why would you continue to do this? So this piece of understanding that this is a conditioned response, this is a problem going on in your brain, is an important piece of awareness to start preventing these things, as we'll see.
Yeah. Think of it as a reflex.
Yeah.
So when you're, if you go into the doctor and he has you cross your legs and he gets out the rubber mallet and he says, "I'm going to hit your knee. I just want you to tell you that in advance, don't move your knee," all right? And he hits your knee, and of course your knee goes boing, and he goes, "Wait a minute, you're not paying attention." And then he hits it again, and it keeps happening. It's a reflex. It's not really it bypasses the part of the brain that would think. So, so this is what this is trying to say, is that repetition leads to conditioning of the brain, but the purpose of this is the brain is your servant. It's trying to help you be efficient. Just like the rest of the body is trying to be efficient. If you want strong muscles and you get a job where you have to lift a hammer and hammer all the time, your muscles will get big. You'll get big biceps, right? Same thing with the brain. The brain says, if he's asking me to do something over and over again, I better get good at it, right? And to give you an example of where that works and is good, helpful things are things that you don't want to. You want to be able to spend some other. How many people drive in their car and while they're driving they think about something else, like what they're going to do during the day? Everybody, right? One of the things.
Or text.
So that's an efficiency that the brain wants us to have, so we can do other things, right? But when it comes to things like the addiction, it's not helpful because it means that you have a reflex and you're having something happening outside of your consciousness. All right. Dan Siegel talks about what is a healthy brain. A healthy brain is one that is integrated. And to give you some examples here, horizontal integration would be the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain being able to communicate, right? Left side is the one that's logical, literal. The right side is the one that's creative, sees things holistically. Another one would be the vertical integration, which is integration of the brainstem with the limbic system and the cerebral cortex. And Dan Siegel says if you want to know how the brain is structured, he has this thing called the hand model. And he says if you hold your hand up, right, and you think of the palm from the wrist up to the palm representing, that would be sort of the brainstem. And the brainstem controls things like your sensory things, like your organs, your sensations you have in your body, things like that. And then he said, if you fold your finger in, that's approximate location of the limbic system. The limbic system holds all the emotional stuff. Now, when it comes to the addiction, what happens is these two things fire. The last thing that comes over the top and like that, that's the cerebral cortex. That's the one that's supposed to think logically, have learned something, think of consequences, those kinds of things. But when the addiction kicks in, what happens is there's not that integration. It's just, he calls it flip-flop. I think he calls pop your top, I think he calls it. So you're firing from these two things. So going back to what it says here is use it or lose it. In recovery, what we want to do is we want to force the person in recovery or encourage them to do activities that integrate the parts of the brain. And if they don't do that, what has happened over the course of using the addiction over and over again, there's sort of an erosion of that ability, that integrated experience, where what would happen is the person would have the sensations, the emotions that he remembers, but his brain, the top part of his brain, the cerebral cortex, would be able to intervene and act sort of like the brakes of the brain. Did you want to say something? Okay.
Talking about like doing something physical with when you're doing the emotional thing, or like.
Yeah, the question was, how do you make that happen, right? The next slide kind of addresses that. So one of the things that we try to encourage people to do is to realize this phenomenon is happening in the body and that the brain is able to heal itself. But in order to do that, you're going to have to lift weights with it. And this is what we call dailies. And we want to do it in 3 areas because the addiction attacks 3 areas. It attacks the person mentally, how they think and the emotions that go along with that, their physical health and their spiritual health. So all of those things, when you engage in, they foster this integration process and the building of the actual. Dan Siegel again said that they can see, actually measure, and see the conductivity building between the parts of the brain when people do this.
Yeah, and so one thing that is so critical early on in recovery is acknowledging how disconnected you've become from your healthy self. It's so frequent, so common to hear. I don't remember what it's like to feel healthy, you know what I mean, what those activities are that make me feel healthy, that make me feel connected. And so being able to, as Tom had mentioned, to essentially flex those muscles to go back to a conscious, intentional way of living, as opposed to a very reactive way of living, which is what has been hijacked in your brain. That's why, you know, you hear about slips, you hear about these relapses, and it's almost as if the guy wakes up and goes, I don't even know what just happened. I just ended up here, because it's so automatic. And so being able to key in on what these three components are really important. The bottom one, spiritual health. I was talking just to Matt just a few minutes ago about that double-edged sword, specifically in our culture, our community, some of the emphasis on religion and things like that. There can be a lot of shame involved that kind of spurred some of this behavior initially, some of the shame. And so learning how to leverage that, disentangle it, so that it's now a positive part of recovery as opposed to, you know, just additional, this makes me feel uncomfortable, and then boom, I'm going to react to that because I don't like dealing with discomfort. I can't tolerate pain from an emotional level. And so my brain has already been programmed to just react, and I'm going to go act out. So.
And there's some examples of things you can do. Notice some of those things have to do with novelty, like learning something new, learning an instrument, that kind of thing. So we're going to talk a little bit about what an acting out incident might look like. It starts with preoccupation. That's just a person starts thinking about something of a sexual nature. Then they go into some sort of behaviors that's not their actual acting out, but it's something that kind of moves in that direction. So the person might go to the ATM machine and get out $300. Let's say his problem was with escorts. So he might go and get $300. For a person that doesn't have an addiction, what's the big deal about getting $300, right? But for him, going to ATM machine has been associated many, 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 many times with ending up being with an escort. So his nervous system recognizes that, it's that superhighway, right? And it says, starts feeling this intensity. Oh boy, this is going to happen. And then the person acts out, and then the person feels cruddy. They feel horrible. Right? So that's generally what happens. So why does somebody do an addiction? The person does an addiction to either reduce distress or to increase pleasure. And these are the three goals, I guess you would say, of addiction behavior. It's either to find arousal, to experience satiation or relaxation, or to experience fantasy, this kind of out of this reality experience. And if you notice in there are chemicals associated with each one of those goals. Arousal is adrenaline, endorphins for satiation, and dopamine for fantasy. In a sense, sometimes I'm talking to guys that say, you know, you can call yourself a porn addict, you might also call yourself a dopamine addict, because your nervous system gets so used to heavy doses and routine doses of this thing that when you try to stop, just like somebody's trying to stop cocaine or something like that, you're going to go through physical withdrawal. It's going to be uncomfortable until your brain gets the message that we're not going to get this stuff anymore, so we need to adapt, right? So, but that doesn't last forever. How long do you think that withdrawal lasts for, the physical withdrawal?
You know, it varies. There's, you know, stories of people really going kind of through those withdrawal symptoms, real physical withdrawal, headaches, shakes, inability to sleep, things like that. On average, it's like 20 to 30 days that they're able to kind of start to cope with it. But I've heard people up to 60, 90 days where they're still kind of feeling effects of that. So just because it's been so much that they've been flooded with.
And so one of the challenges, if the person keeps going back and dipping in to little aspects of getting lust and hits, then they're never really going to fully withdraw because they're still getting the addiction.
And that's really important, as we'll see, that it's not just looking at the pornography itself or engaging in the acting out process that does that. It's euphoric recall, images that can be pulled up from the past, or just little, like you said, little lust hits here and there. So.
Yeah. So there was a guy that used to work at our network, and he gave a talk once, and I taped it because I liked what he said, and I was listening to it. I think it might have been at one of these things, and he said, a lot of times what happens is that the addiction kind of comes in at a very early age. I'm going to use the example of men again, but in teenage years. And he said it's sort of like what happens is they're going through all the stress of teenage years, the peer pressure, all that stuff, and insecurities and blah, 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 all that, right? And he says almost like super glue came out. You had a super glue without the cap on. And all of a sudden they discover this sexual thing that takes the pain right off the radar screen. Bang, super glue on top of this pain. And it doesn't take too many repetitions of that before the nervous system kind of gets the idea. If I'm feeling pain, I don't have to feel this. I can just go, let's see if I get this arrow work right. I can go right to preoccupation, and that's what it does, like on an automatic basis. So this is a conditioned response to distress or pain. And what the person is doing is addiction actually has become a disconnection from other people. The person kind of goes, when he feels pain, he goes within and uses this thing that he uses on his own so he doesn't have to feel this. There's an author, psychologist, named Flores, I forget if Dr. Flores, and he wrote a book called Addiction as an Attachment Disorder. And he said that what addicts do when they disconnect from other people and go within to deal with this experience of pain, they're doing something that's abnormal. Our species was not built for this. Our species as human beings, we were built to regulate our emotions by reaching out to other people, right? If you think of the things that you see in TV or even things you experience in your own life, what happens when someone dies? What do we all do? We go to the funeral, right? We gather together, right? And we go by the person who's lost a loved one, and then we say, hey, Harry, I'm really sorry. If you want to talk or don't want to talk, I'll spend a little time with you. And so the guy says, yeah, afterwards, in a little while, let's do that. And he goes out and he talks to you, and how does he feel? He feels better, right? A little bit better? You can't bring the loved one back, but there's something about talking to another person that takes emotions that are this big and brings them down to something manageable. And that's what addicts lose. They lose the instinct that was given to us by our maker, by nature, to, when you're in distress, you reach out and connect. So.
Yeah, so the connection piece is something that I hear over and over and over again. And as guys tell their stories, as I kind of relive my own story of struggle. This piece didn't make any sense to me at all. It doesn't make sense to a lot of guys. I mean, the shameful nature of acting out, everything that it represents, the icky feelings, the guilt. Why would you want to talk to anybody about that? And so the brain says, nah, that's just more pain. If I was to tell somebody about that, they're not going to accept me if they know that this is a part of my life. And so reaching in and trying to soothe that pain. But what we discover, obviously, is that we're wired for that connection. It's actually why we're going to the drug in the first place. We find some sort of pseudo-connection there. It's safe, it's not risky, so we're not going to be rejected by anybody. But there's literal connection that occurs. There's connection with the images, there's connections with these people. I hear this one particular guy I'm reminded of, who he just could not stop talking about how much he longed for a connection when he was kind of in that preoccupation stage. So lonely, so sad. But he felt like, man, if he could go and visit this lady next door, you know, maybe she would give him some sort of sense of like that he meant something, you know what I mean? Or look at pornography. Somehow these women represented somebody that wanted him, you know what I mean? And so changing what that actually looks like for somebody. What does connection really look like? Reaching out, establishing accountability partners, having a sponsor, being able to talk to people that seem risky, you know what I mean, that might be scary to talk to and share your story with. That's true connection. What it does is it forces your brain to use a different pathway. And you know, now you're using that rational part of your brain, and it flexes that muscle. And the more you do it, the more that you're now, as Tom has mentioned, you're now building new pathways to a place where, you know, you can tolerate pain, you can tolerate risk, instead of turning inwards and just soothing yourself. So.
And this actually relates to this, going back to the tools that you would use for healthy living. You'll notice that there are about 6 bullets. I don't know if you can see it. They should be bolded a bit. They go group therapy, 12-step meetings, developing a network, daily contact with a sponsor, becoming a sponsor, transparency. Those things, every one of those, what they have in common is the idea of being able to reach out to another person and tell them what's going on. Transparency is basically honesty. You're telling people what's going on with you. And some of these things, like group therapy and 12-step meetings, Dr. Flores, that I mentioned before, who wrote that book, Addiction and Attachment Disorder, he said this is the rudiments. This is a rudimentary place where a person can share about something they have so much shame about that they would rather, some of them would rather go to their grave than have anybody ever find out about it. And instead, they're actually able to talk to people because the people have the same affliction. There's nobody there that's better than them, you know. And so that's a really important thing there. Now, when we look at what to do in living at risk, this is the one where I said that the goal here is to become an expert in your version of the addiction. And we're going to look at 2 tools that are highlighted there, defining sobriety and defining boundaries. You probably can't see this very well because it's just a Word document.
We thought we were going to have this huge screen.
Yeah. But the sections on it, in the middle here is where you would document what we call bottom lines. Now, bottom line is a term that if you're not familiar with 12-step programs for treating addiction, you might not be familiar with, but a bottom line is basically your definition of what sobriety is. And when you break that, you're supposedly, at that point, you would define yourself as not being sober anymore. That's usually pretty easy for people to find. They'll say, well, yeah, it's porn and masturbation and seeing escorts and things like that. The second section down here has 2 columns. One says protective barriers, and the other one says warning indicators. Protective barriers are things that the person would identify as being something they can put between them and that addictive behavior. So it makes it less easy for them to get at that. Warning indicators, which is the next column over, those are things that when the person looks at it a bit, they find out those are the things that aren't even necessarily associated with the addiction. You wouldn't usually associate it with that. A lot of it's sort of emotional things like stress, anxiety, holding on to resentment, those kinds of things. So those are warning indicators. Let's see here. Okay, oh good, here's the animated part. So you have this little guy, and the guy in that cloud there is having some emotion. Maybe it's stress. And his nervous system has been trained over time to immediately go to pornography. So the way that the the barriers, what the protective barriers work is the protective barriers are meant to stop the person from getting to the addiction, or at least impede his progress to getting to it. So an example of that from pornography would be the person puts a filter on his computer. Maybe he doesn't have cable TV anymore, that kind of thing, okay? All right, so here he is with the same situation. It's him, he's got the stress. He gets, his nervous system starts to respond. Remember, it says up there, nervous system is a faithful servant. What's the nervous system been trained to do? If I feel stressed, I'm going to go right to the addiction. But what happens? Great. He goes out to try to, he thinks about, I'm going to go use my phone. He goes, I don't have a phone. Oh, that didn't work. Is he still feeling stress? Yeah, okay, nervous system says, I can't deal with this. What, I have to go try to get this pornography. So he goes out and finds out that he doesn't have access to the internet or something. Oh, that didn't work. But guess what? The addiction gets creative, right? Sometimes people will do things like they'll get rid of all the electronic devices. When push comes to shove, they'll grab their credit card at 10 at night and run down to Best Buy and buy the cheapest device they can find that'll get on the internet. Have to get creative, right? So that's a problem. So the solution is...
Tom, could I just stop right there?
Yeah.
I think it's really, really important to note that when you're alone doing this and you're feeling the stress, you'll have all sorts of promises that you're gonna stop doing it because of the shame and the guilt and whatnot. And so you'll come up with a lot of great tools to stop yourself from acting out. But I emphasize stop yourself from acting out. Because that's really all it is. I mean, you hear, okay, put on this browser blocker or whatever, this particular software, and you're doing it alone, and over again, you just hear like, these addicts are just great at finding back doors to stuff. It doesn't matter if they just made that decision already that they want to act out and stop the pain. They'll stop at nothing to find that back door to be able to act out. And so there's really no preventive measure out there that's going to be 100% certain, but there is something that does work.
Because you notice in this situation that we've described here, the initial problem that was fueling the thing was the stress. Did he deal with the stress? No, he just kept putting these blocks out there. So blocks are good in a sense in that they make the person slow down a bit. They can't get immediately to the addictive behavior, but it won't last for long. So the solution is to address it in a different way. C there on this diagram represents probably some ritual behavior that he would have used to start moving in the direction of acting out. Instead, he's going to do C prime, all right? So when I tell people to try to suggest a way they can experience why this might be a good thing to try something different than C prime, I usually say to a guy, let's use the example of a guy, I'll say, so if I gave you a razor in the morning to shave, what side of the face would you start on? And the guy think for a while, I go, well, I guess I start on the right side. Okay, so tomorrow, I said, because that's sort of an automatic thing you did. You didn't have to think about it, right? I tell him how when I shave, I get preoccupied in the morning and I'll do whatever I do. I get in the shower, right? And I say, jeepers, did I shave? And I'll have to go like this. I don't even remember whether I shaved, right? It's so automatic. And I go, oh yeah, I did. Good. So I give them the experiment. I say, okay, start somewhere else on your face. Don't start where you normally start. And I tried that myself. And I thought, okay, I'll start here. And then I had to think, what am I going to do next? Do I do my lip? Do I do my chin? What do? I had to think about it. What does that mean? That means when you alter anything in the pattern, the next step has to be thought about. Now, does it mean the guy can't go back to D here and go on and act out? Yeah, he can, but it would be a conscious decision. It wouldn't be a reflex. Okay, so the advantage to that is that after doing that for a while, that pattern atrophies, and what replaces it is a new pattern. And so for the guy, it might be, if I feel stressed or depressed with work, I've learned a new pattern. I call my sponsor, I call somebody in my group, I do something different. And that's why those little people are at the end of that, where it says F, because it generally will have something to do with people.
Yep. Yeah, that reaching out is going to be the key component that's so uncomfortable, but the most, the critical part of changing that automatic, response.
Yeah. So there's some other tools here. The main thing it's mentioning here is that refining boundaries. Remember I said the goal here in the middle section is to become an expert in your own addiction. That means you're going to learn something from your mistakes, and you're going to know that you have to change your boundaries. The last section here is about what do you do with relapse, and here you want to minimize the damage and return as rapidly as possible to recovery work. And the two tools here, again, I apologize you can't read these, but the first one is a emergency relapse recovery agreement. This is one that you would do with somebody who's like a best friend who understands your addiction and wants to help you with it. It could be something you're asking him to do, he agrees to do, you both sign it. So it might be something like, hey, if I call you in an emergency, I'm going to give you a picture and I want you to tell me what you see in the picture. So we're going to do a dry run. So you call him, he calls and says, so what do you see in the picture? And he says, well, I see your little daughter holding onto your leg and she's wearing a pink dress and she's looking up at you adoringly, and your wife is wearing a white dress and she's hugging you and giving you a kiss. What would that do to the addict who's about to act out? It'd be a reminder, right? I don't want to do this. This is going to kill me. So the agreement there is something that the person makes with someone else. And this next one is the relapse prevention plan. You notice the first 3 items on there have a name and a telephone number. These would be 3 people that you have the emergency relapse agreement with. The following lines I didn't fill in, but those would be other actions you might take, like, hey, if I get in trouble, I'm going to remove myself physically from whatever environment I'm in. So the next section, we're going to look a little bit at some of specifically the tools related to the middle section, living at risk, and the tools we're going to look at are relapse prevention sheet and chain analysis. And the first one I'll show up here is chain analysis. I know it's a little bit hard to read, but it is saying basically that it's a chain and it reads left to right, and it's saying that the rightmost behavior would be the final acting out behavior, like using pornography or masturbation. But it's saying, you don't just arrive there out of nowhere. It's really probably the interplay of a bunch of things. And on the left there, you probably can't read it, but it's the things that those could be, those links in the chain could be actions, bodily sensations, not just what you see and smell and hear, but also are you tired? Do you have pain, physical pain? Cognitions, things you might think, things you might, and E is for environment or events that happen to you. And then lastly is feelings. So this is saying that, you know what, didn't come out of nowhere. It's probably an intersection or interplay between all these things. And this last thing over here, it's just the same thing, it's in table form. So you're taking the things you discover about what were the actions, what were the feelings, what were the thinking, and putting in a table form.
Yeah, and Tom, you say you didn't just arrive there, but for anybody that's just arrived there, they would definitely say that that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
You know what
right.
I mean? That as I'm going to go back to what I was talking about earlier about how detached from healthy living someone who's steeped in this addiction can become, is that they're so disengaged with what their body is telling them, what their mind is telling them, what their emotions are. They can't even define emotion anymore. It's so commonplace to say, okay, let's do a quick check-in. What are you feeling?
I don't know.
And just stammering for, like, I can't quite put a beat on what I feel like. And that's really, really common because you've cut off feeling for so long. You've cut it off for so long that really there's no recognition of that anymore. So being able to get back to not only having awareness around it, but putting it out there for other people, that is kind of the crux of this is, I can kind of get good now at recognizing that I'm feeling depressed or having some anxiety or I don't feel right, my body, I feel achy, but sharing that with somebody else who's in the addiction as well, and having them go, hey, yeah, you're good. You're getting close to getting taken out here. You know what I mean? Thanks for reaching out. But if you'd stuck with this yourself, what's your MO? Care for it. Take care of it yourself, and that's the addiction kicks back in, and you medicate.
And just how this works in the group or in individual therapy, what we do is we use Post-it notes or tear up a piece of paper, and what we do is we work from the right to the left. So you start out here on the right where the person says, I use pornography and I masturbated, and you say, okay, look, the easiest things to work with are the actions. So what did you do before that? Okay, What about before that? And you start working your way backwards. And then you start filling in with, okay, those are the actions. How were you feeling at the time? What were the emotions? What was happening to you? So we're going to do a little role play to show that. Just before we do it, because we're going to ask you to participate if you want. There's some extra tools in here that are bolded on the right-hand side, which can be useful. Contact with a sponsor, having an accountability partner. These are people that you involve in your recovery and you're being honest with about what you're doing, thinking, feeling, and commitments you're making to recovery. Check-ins, which is talking to people to let them know what's going on with you. Bookending is really interesting. Bookending has to do with that connection thing, but what you're doing is you're contacting somebody before a stressful event or possible distressful event and afterwards. So it's a little safety device. You contact somebody before, you contact somebody afterwards. And then coping skills. So let's do the role play. This is, in this role play, I'm gonna play 2 roles. Is this okay to do this?
I guess you can play both roles.
Yeah,
I'm
I
going
will.
to feel really alone by myself.
Oh, that's all right.
No,
You'll get over it.
So during this role play, we're hoping that you guys can have some awareness or give feedback as well to Tom and Bob, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be the therapist sometimes, and sometimes I'm going to wear my Red Sox hat. Sometimes it's going to be Bob. So you'll know when I put this on Bob. He's one of the group members. Alice is going to be one of the group members. When I have my hat off, I'll be the therapist. All right.
That's how good Tom is at compartmentalizing.
So in this thing, pretend you're all part of the group. You're part of this therapy group, sex addiction therapy group. Alex is also. And we just got done doing check-ins where everybody says how they're doing. And so I turn to Bob and say, Bob, we missed you Tuesday night. You weren't at the meeting. How you doing? And so I'll be Bob. So, man, I didn't even want to come tonight. You know how hard it's been for me to get 6 months of sobriety. I've worked so hard. And anyway, Katie threw me out. She had good reason. I had sex with a stripper at the strip club and oral sex. And man, I can't believe I did. I worked so hard. I can't believe this happened. I don't know. I didn't even want to come. I don't know. Anyway, I didn't want to come. Okay. So, Bob, how about if the group helps you a little bit and we'll use chain analysis, see if we can figure out what happened, and then see if we can figure out what maybe could have done differently. Is that okay? Yeah, it's okay. All right. So anyway, okay, well, we all understand how chain analysis works, right? We're going to work from the end point and work backwards, okay? So we're going to start at the end where Bob said he had that sex with that dancer, right? And then kind of work our way to the left, find out what happened. So Bob, tell us what happened. Well, like I said, I went to the strip club and this dancer came by and she said, hey, will you buy me a drink? And so I said, okay, I'll buy you a drink. And so when she sat down to drink, she said, hey, if you want a private show, we could do that. And so she took me to this private room they have, and then I should have known better, but anyway, it happened. Okay, so you want me to work backwards? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Yeah.
So how'd you end up there, Tom?
So I had come from the sports bar. I went to the sports bar, and when I was at the sports bar, I was just feeling really cruddy. I guess I should spill the story out. So I was feeling really cruddy because I think I may have had a slip. I don't know. I was at work really late at night, and I was feeling horrible and under a lot of stress. And I got this email because I should probably not have checked my email, but I checked my email. It was like 10 o'clock at night, and I was feeling a lot of stress because all the stuff that's coming down at work. And it was an email from Harry, and you know Harry, right? He was the guy I used to carouse with all the time.
Yeah, you talked about him.
And he says, hey, you got to check this out. And I clicked on the email. I shouldn't have done it, and it was something about the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, and it said, hey, if you want to see more, click here, right? And so I clicked, and it was one of the cheerleaders in lingerie, and I started feeling this excitement. Before that, I'd been feeling depressed and frightened, and then I kept I went from that to other lingerie sites, and I said, well, it's not really porn, is it? I mean, it's not really porn. It's just lingerie, right? And so then I started stimulating myself a little bit, and I realized where this was going. I said, you got to get out of here, got to get out of here. And so, I headed for, I left, and I went to the sports bar. I figured I'd watch the basketball and maybe it would get my mind off this stuff. And I went there, and but I started thinking, you know, Katie's going, you're a loser, man. Who are you kidding? You already had a slip. I don't care what you call it. You had a slip. You're a darn loser, you know. And so I ordered the drink. Started feeling even worse. Felt like I already had a slip. What's the difference here? And so I remembered that down the street there was a strip joint, and so I went there. So anyway, is that far enough? Do you need to know any more?
No, I'm really curious. You said you weren't going to stay. You've told us as a group you weren't going to stay out, stay at work late and alone. I mean, what were you doing there?
That's another story. So I guess going back further, I had a big fight with Katie. I hadn't been home for 3 nights in a row. I mean, I had been home, but for like 3 hours. I get 3 hours sleep Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. And here we are Thursday, and I was like exhausted, but I figured I got to go home, man. I haven't been home that much, seen anybody, and I went home and I was exhausted. And Sally, our daughter, had been visiting our neighbors, one of her friends they got lots of money, and she comes in, she's 14, she sits down at the table, and she's talking about her friend has this, and her friend has that, and her friend has this, and da-da-da-da-da. And then she says to me, you know what, we're like white trash. And I just lost it. I started screaming at her, telling her, you're the most selfish girl I've ever seen. I can't believe you would say something like that. You can't even take your dirty clothes and put them in the hamper, you know. And she started crying. She jumped up from the table. She ran away upstairs. And Katie, my wife, she looked at me and she said, who the heck is the adult here? She said, you make this big thing out of your 6 months of sobriety. I don't even know where you've been in the last 3 nights. You come in really late at night. If this is sobriety, why don't you just go act out? And she was screaming at me, and she was really upset. And so I thought, holy mackerel, I'm a failure at home. I'm a failure at work. Maybe I'll just go to work and see if I can salvage that at least. And so that's why I ended up working late. And I don't know. Is that enough? Do you need to know any more?
It's like, wow, it seems like you're pretty geared up there when you're at home. What's going on at work right now that's so, I don't know, so stressful?
Oh, man. So Monday, my boss calls me in. And what happened is, like a month ago, this project, that really important project that I'm in charge of, we lost a key person. And so I was like working hard behind the scenes trying to make it so that nobody would notice that and we'd get in on time, but we fell behind. And every Monday morning at 8 o'clock, he has a meeting with his peers from the other departments, and they were really upset with him because this deliverables I'm supposed to produce, their projects were falling behind because I hadn't done that. And so he calls me in, and he closes the door, and he starts screaming at me. And he says, you know, I thought I could trust you. I gave you this high-priority project. I thought you had it in you to do it right. And he says, you know what I hate? I hate being embarrassed in front of my peers and not knowing what's going on. And you know what? If you don't get this together and get this done by the end of this week, you might as well start thinking about another job. And so, man, I was scared. Anyway, so I started working late. That's why I only got 3 hours sleep Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. It was just a mess. So I'm going to be the therapist for a moment. So, all right, so let's look at a little bit of what Bob told us, okay?
There's a lot of information in that story.
So this is the picture. The strip club is on the last thing. We worked backwards to find out that he went to a sports bar. Prior to that, he was at work really late. Prior to that, he was home where he had that big fight with his wife and his daughter. And Monday was that horror show with his boss, right? And then the work thing happened at, 1 month ago, he lost that key worker, right? So if we had time, we would lay this all out with Post-it notes. And the good thing about using Post-it notes is you can pull something out, you can rearrange it. It's really nice for brainstorming this kind of thing. But what it might look like if we expand just the sports bar thing, it documents what were the things that happened at the sports bar. First of all, he went to it. That was an action. He had a thought, you're a loser, right? He did an action, which he started drinking. Prior to that, he hadn't been drinking because he was at work. Then he had some thinking. Who are you kidding? You know, you've already slipped. Who are you kidding? You're not kidding anybody, right? He remembers the images. He's at the bar and he remembers the images of the lingerie, right? And he feels some excitement, but at the same time he feels despair and self-hatred because I had a slip. I can't believe I did that. Katie, now you know a little bit more about the history. His wife was already mad at him. He already made a mess at home. He had his boss about ready to fire him. He's feeling really bad, right? And so what does he do? He goes to the strip club, right? So that's how you would work it. You would take the Post-it notes. You'd try to figure out whether. Yes, I'm sorry.
I just want to say that I'm really happy with what you're talking about here. In fact, I like the cognition thoughts up there. One of the things that a counselor has taught me is that if when you bump into a problem like that, like an addiction, that kind of thing, you can practice fighting the negative thought, fighting the addiction. One of the things that a counselor practices with me, we call it tossing the pillow. He tends to be my addiction or negative thought, and they would say, this is the only way that you're going to feel good. But then I would fight back and say, no, I got more important things I can do, more pleasant and fun things that can make me happy. And so I just keep going back and forth until the bad thoughts can't fight me anymore. Crush them. Crush the bad thoughts. You win.
And that brings up the next topic, actually. Thanks for bringing that up, because if we go back to this thing, when we go back to this thing, what we're looking for is skills that a person, or interventions that a person could do to make it less likely to end up in this thing. So I thought, I don't know how much time we have. We have 5 minutes, great. So let's think, does anybody have any idea where did this problem start? Where do you think some things he could have done differently that would have made this not turn out the way it did? Back there?
Yeah, so my name's Joseph. I think he's just self-awareness, and that's kind of the basic thing that we're getting at. It's like, instead of letting A lead to B, lead to C, lead to D, he started A. Oh, I'm feeling really stressed, and then connecting and reaching out, instead of like letting it just pile on and letting that magma and that volcano keep growing.
So what happened in A?
He had a blow up at work.
Even before that, right? Like big project, coworker leaves, right?
Whatever could be underlying factors that may have been something else.
Okay.
And maybe his coworker has issues, but his Bob internalized them, right?
Yeah, sure. And
What do you think that, what did he do wrong in this first piece out here where it said work 1 month? He didn't ask for help. He kept it a secret. So that might represent sort of a character flaw for him. Maybe it's hard for him. Maybe he grew up in a family where, you know what, guys just tough it out. You know what I mean?
We talk about faulty core beliefs a lot,
Yeah.
and that is the foundation. You think about, like, I'm weak if I have to ask for help, right?
Right. And so he would have, if he had asked for help, he probably would have, he would have talked to the boss. He would have probably suggested some things that could be different. Maybe let's trim the scope. Can you lend me another person? Can we extend the deadlines? Blah, blah, blah. But who else?
He had a comment right here, so. A lot of blaming going on, right?
Who else didn't he tell? He didn't tell his boss, but who else didn't he tell? His wife. So he's got this thing where he's just closed down. He's not letting people know what's going on. If he had a sponsor, this would be one of the suggestions for him, would be, hey, do you have a sponsor? His answer would be, oh, no, I don't have a sponsor. That might be a suggestion. If you had a sponsor and you talked to him every day and you called your sponsor and he said, how did yesterday go? And you go, oh, not too good. I lost my key worker. what are you going to do about it? I'm just going to keep it secret and work really hard.
Yep, yeah, yeah. I'm not going to tell my wife because, oh man, what's she going to think about me? She already knows about my addiction, and when I get stressed out, that's where it's gone. So if I tell her I'm stressed out, that's going to be triggering for her. So I'm just going to keep it to myself, and hopefully I'll figure this out at work and won't be a problem.
Yeah, and let's say that he told his boss, and the boss says, tough luck, buddy, get it together, and I'm not giving you any more resources, not trimming scope or anything. So now he comes in late, right, and it's a mess. So he's into the thing with, he works really hard, doesn't get any sleep. He comes home, and his daughter says, you know what, we're just darn white trash, that's all we are. What do you think his wife would have done if she knew about this all, knew how hard he's working? What, you think she would have lit into him? Right? No, she would have not been happy that he lost his temper, you know what I mean? But she would have been understanding about it. Maybe she would even intervene and said, honey, you know, don't say that to your dad, that's disrespectful. He worked so hard for our family. You know, that would have worked out. Now, let's say he had to go to work. Now, he's not upset, but he does have to go to work really late at night. What should he do knowing that that's a sort of a risky thing, right? He's got the internet, it's late at night, he's tired. Yeah?
She said set up a support system, make a plan. Yep. Yeah. Hence that the accountability partners that we
Right.
talked about, that sheet, relapse prevention plan, you know, already have somebody in place. So when things start to get reactive, you know, okay, got to call it. I've got to call these people and let them know what's going on.
Yeah, and remember the thing we talked about, bookending? He knows he's going to work. He knows it's a dangerous situation. He contacts his support person ahead of time and says, I have to go to work. I'm really wiped out. It's kind of a dangerous situation for me. Can I call you in a half hour? Or can I call you when I get there? And then they might work out a plan like, yeah, why don't you call me every half hour after that, you know? Just to check in to make sure you're doing okay, right? So these are some of the things that come out of turning a slip into a useful recovery thing, because what's he going to do about that? He's going to work on getting support. He's going to work on his humility or pridefulness that he has. He's going to let people know, including his wife, what's going on. He's going to build a support network and notice where his risks are. Notice that that's a risky thing for him and that he needs to bookend it and have support all around that, right? And so if all that happens, he's never going to end up here, right? So much of when we think about recovery, we said, well, you should have had a block on your computer. Yeah, that would be the boundary, right? That would be a boundary. But it wouldn't help them deal with his pain.
Sorry to comment, but I was actually dating a guy who had an addiction just a few months ago. Yeah. So I was just saying I was dating a guy with a pornography addiction, and one Sunday he told me that he felt like acting out that he wanted to look at pornography, and he asked if he could stay with me that day, and we just did our own activities. It was a Sunday, so he would have been bored, and he really appreciated that, and I really appreciated his honesty and really liked that he reached out to me.
So you were like his support person in that case, yeah. And he was choosing a different behavior, right?
Yeah, he was.
So
sorry.
Oh, okay. Hmm.
And if you get past it, if you let it go past that, you're going to arrive at the end before you ever know it.
Hmm.
But it's that age that you've got to go to that support group or go to whatever you've got lined up.
That's right.
Because your flesh is not strong enough to curb it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have that help until that brain is
And let me share this from my own personal experience. The common thread here, as far as intervention, is reaching out because it's so danged uncomfortable. We talked about it early on. This is an attachment problem, and it started really, really young, when somebody was supposed to be there for me to tell me it's going to be all right, or I've got your back. It didn't feel that way, and so guess what I found? I found that I could do it on my own. That was the running theme in my life. I can do it on my own. When things get tough, things get hard, things get stressful, I can do it on my own. But guess what? Could I really do it on my own? No. but something helped me deal with the pain, helped me deal with the pain. So reaching out actually became the hardest possible thing.
And so I guess we're kind of out of time, but there's a good place to stop because it actually goes back to what Alex said way back in the beginning when he said that relapse is kind of something that happens, right? You can kind of expect it in recovery because the person has to learn through the school of hard knocks about his addiction. So this is trying to paint the picture, help you understand that, yeah, you know, having a slip is not a great thing, but if you learn something from it and you can apply new skills and build new resources that are necessary, the relapses become further and further apart until they don't happen anymore. So we hope this has been helpful to you. Yeah?
Is there any kind of a common time frame for how to work through and rewire and get all that done? Does it take years or can it be done in months? What is your experience?
So Patrick Carnes talks about reprogramming of the brain, reprogramming of those networks. So if somebody is in an active recovery, meaning they are doing everything they can to reach out and work their recovery, regardless of whether they're having struggles, if they are working this and moving backwards and seeing things farther upstream, it still takes about 5 years to reprogram the brain.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't...
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
If you have questions, you can